Hi guys. Once again, same model. I'll go through the webinar with an agenda that you'll see in a few seconds here, and then open it up for questions. Until then, just note down the questions on a paper or on your computer, and then we can address them after the presentation.
Yeah. And
yes,
Chris,
please.
Even after the webinar, the participant might have certain type of questions where you might have to answer. So what I have done is I have created a WhatsApp group.
Sorry, Vijeta, we can't hear you.
Which I'm going to share it in the chat window right now. Chris,
I'm sorry, Vijeta, we lost you. We couldn't hear anything you said.
Okay, no problem. Chris, go ahead.
So when you talk, Vijeta, your voice is getting mixed up. I don't know why. So I'll let you know next time you say something, right? Did you hear me?
Yes, Chris, I can hear you clearly. I'm trying to figure out what is the problem. Meanwhile, you can go ahead.
All right. So, but basically, you said after the webinar, you want me to answer more questions, right?
Yeah. The thing is, I have created a WhatsApp group where all these participants can join, and even after the webinar, if they are having any questions, they can type in those questions in those WhatsApp group, and you and any of us can answer that.
Okay, great. That works.
Okay.
Just send me an invite.
I'm going to take that
group,
WhatsApp group link here. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Great. Let me close this participant window. Okay, great. So today what we're going to do is we're going to see how you can consume a REST service inside Graphite. And I'm going to talk about Graphite Studio extensibility. What that shows us is how to consume an external DLL in C# or any language that can create a DLL from inside Graphite and call the methods inside the class files of inside the DLL. And then we'll take a really complex project that was written, a complex application that was written using Graphite to kind of get an idea of what kind of complex applications you can build. Graphite's specialty is to build really complex applications that large enterprises need with much, much, much ease. And in turn, it creates the absolutely most perfect quality code than any handwritten code ever compared. And then I'll open it up for questions after that. So I'm going to show you a couple of links and discuss how we're going to consume a REST service, an example REST service. And then these are kind of the links that I have here. So when the document's available in the Incubate Hub portal, you'll have all those links available for you. So let's jump into my virtual machine. I'm going to stop sharing and share my virtual machine right now. Bear with me for a couple seconds. There you go. I'm about to say it. Okay, there you go. Right. Now I'm going to share my virtual machine here. Vijeta, just one quick interruption. Let me know if you can see my my machine.
No, we are still seeing your desktop.
Okay, yeah, you're seeing my desktop. Okay, that's exactly what I wanted to know. Okay. So today we're going to create a small Graphite project to consume a web service provided by this company. What happens is, you know how we have a PIN code in India for every locality? In the US, it's called ZIP, Zonal Index Point or something like that. But it's basically called ZIP. And this web service, somebody out there is selling this web service that gives you a bunch of functionality. The functionality that we're going to consume inside Graphite is going to be this. This is given 2 zip codes. This web service returns us the distance between those 2 zip codes. And if you look at the documentation, it looks like this, right? It's whatever the customer decided to type up. Now, I wanted to talk about the differences between SOAP and REST for a few seconds. I may have done that in a previous webinar, but I wanted to repeat that here since we are going to consume a REST service. SOAP, when you create a SOAP service and expose it, when you write a method and you expose it as a SOAP service, it creates a window for you. What that means is the details about that method are nicely documented or into a contract called the window. Now, what does that mean? It means that people that consume that window will now know what are the methods exposed by this service, what are the parameters these methods take, what parameters are these methods returning. So you have the complete picture. So you can have IDEs that can simply read a window, create all the objects that are consumed and returned. So it can simply fill them, send it, and get it back. With REST, you don't have any of that. As you can see in this case, this particular person wrote this REST service, exposed it, put it up on the internet, but he did not have to write this documentation. If he didn't go write this documentation, save it as a PDF, and put it in his website, that REST service still works. You can, if the document doesn't exist, you can get on the phone with that person and find out what the documentation is. What that means is you have a bunch of issues with that. One, when you go into a large company and especially in these days when people use the word microservices all over the place, they could be building several services that do the same exact job because the first one wasn't documented. So when let's say somebody wrote a web service to get a bank account value at a bank, and they publish it. Somebody else in the company uses that web service or REST service. They forgot to document it because the guy that exposed it and the guy that's consuming it, whether it's a boy or a girl, they are friends, so they talked, and the guy said, oh, send me the account number in a text format, and I'll send you this object that's going to have the account name, first name, last name, and total value. And then, okay, guys, the frame from, can you please mute? Can you please mute?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to continue. So let's say a couple of years go by and another department wants that same REST service. Another programmer, not knowing that REST service exists because it's not documented, could be rewriting it. So that's redundancy. And then when some logic changes, only one of them could be updated. You can be showing wrong values to your customer. And it becomes a serious problem, especially in the US. People will sue you for showing them the wrong value of your account number. So it's, all those things are very important. So this problem existed for REST. It still exists, but a company basically started documenting the REST service. And that company was called Swagger, and now it actually is called OpenAPI. What they did was, for any of the web services that are exposed, they help document it. So, and standardize this documentation. So now you can have a website where all the REST services exposed by the company are in one place. People can go check there first before they decide to write the new web service or use the existing one. And so this is an example of Swagger YAML, and we'll talk about this in a second. So I looked at Google Geocode. That's a web service that's exposed by Google, where it does things like if I give it a zip code or if I give it a latitude and longitude, it'll return all the addresses in that latitude and longitude. Now, Google did not write Swagger documentation for all their platform. Google has, I'm sure, tens of thousands of web services that they expose via their API platform, but they haven't gotten around to creating Swagger documentation. Just like any large company, you know, they're slow to move. They were a fast company before, but now they're slow. So people out there, they start writing the Swagger documentation as open source and give it to people. I happen to write this Swagger for Google's Geocode. Similarly, what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you, this is the Swagger that I wrote for this guy. For the zip code distance that we're going to do today, again, this guy didn't write Swagger for it. I wrote this and I sent it to him, and he has actually posted it on his website for other people to use the Swagger. So Swagger is nothing but a JSON that explains the full details about that web service. You can go to swagger.com or swagger.io, my fault, to actually access the details about how to write Swagger. They have a lot of tools where it can automatically figure out the details behind your API. For example, let's say I take this JSON and I paste it here. It converts the JSON to YAML, and you'll see this is the documentation. It basically says get distance, and it takes a API key, it takes in 2 zips, and it takes a format, and then it returns the distance. And if you look at this, right, if you want to know how to write this, which will be a really good addition to your resume, whether code challenge or not, if you want to know how to look at details, like if you want to do PAT, you can go in here and you can look for it here. So for example, parameter serialization, there's PATs. So this documentation will help you learn how to build this JSON. In fact, what I do is I build it here, and then when I save it as a JSON. And there's a reason why I save it as a JSON. I'll show you in a second. Now, so like I said, this documentation is something that you could use to learn how to build this, or you can simply search. You can say Swagger space. Let's say we wanted to look at something like consumes. So you can just say Swagger space consumes. There you go, mine times, and you'll see the documentation here. So that's a very important thing for your career, to learn how to build Swagger. And of course, Graphite, by using Graphite, it helps you learn that stuff. But only for companies that don't have these documentation. A lot of companies now are starting to document REST services in Swagger. Now let's go to Graphite and start a new project to consume the zip web service. So I'm going to go into Graphite. It opens up the last project I'm working on. I'm going to click that logo. I'm going to push new. We're going to create a sample web application today. I call it zip distance. We're going to create a local implementation project. Today, let's say we don't want to create a data model. We're simply consuming a web service and showing some results on the screen. I just use the core library. Shows all the components in the core library. I click OK. This is my home page for the project. First thing I have to do here is set up the web service connection. So I'm going to create a new category called services. And in here, I'm going to add a web service. And I'm going to give it a name. So we'll call it zip distance API. And it's REST. We can also consume SOAP inside Graphite. I'm going to consume REST. I'll click OK. And it takes me to this screen. Here is where I have to put the URL that gives us this JSON. I happen to take this JSON and put it out there in a public website. So I can copy this. Sorry, I can copy this and I can, my fault. I can copy this and paste it there. If you happen to write this JSON and keep it on a file in your hard drive, for example, I have this in a hard drive right here. Not a problem. You can copy the folder path and then you can copy the file name as well. So you don't have to put it up on the internet when you create this JSON. So you can do this as well. So let's do that because most people do that. Once you push save, what Graphite does is it opens up that JSON, opens up this JSON and completely understands it, and it's ready for you to make those connections to that web service. How do you set up those REST methods? You go to the methods section and you push add method. And when you push add method, here is where you can choose all the methods that are available in the REST service as explained by this web service. So in our example, I only set up one method to be consumed. So if I choose category, distance between zips, get, and if I choose distance PHP, apparently that person wrote that code in using PHP, it shows there. You see the method, and here's the parameters that it's taking, and here's what it's returning. And notice that little icon there. That is what's called a data contract, and I'm going to explain what a data contract is in a few seconds. So let's give it a name. I'm going to call it a friendly name, get distance. And before I save it, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. Now, if you find out that some of these are of different types. So let's say even if this Swagger documentation is wrong, see with SOAP, when you build your SOAP service, the WSDL is automatically created. So if you make changes to the SOAP service, the WSDL will be updated. In REST, you still have the problem of if you went in and if whoever wrote this web service changed that to zipx, the Swagger won't automatically change. You will have to go to the Swagger documentation and make the change wherever you see zip 1 and zip 2. You'll have to make that change. So if you don't, the web service call won't work, obviously. But Graphite gives you a way to go in and you can change it right here. You can change your variable or your property, or you can change the property that the contract is returning to X. So we have given you the capability to update your consumption details right in Graphite, instead of if the customer, if the person that's selling you this website hasn't changed the documentation, but they have changed the web service, Graphite will provide you a way to fix it right here. Now this icon, notice that this icon showed up here. What happens with this web service is when you send in 4 of these text parameters, it's returning a whole object back for you. So that object can contain other objects and so on and so forth. This lists out those data contracts or objects. What is the difference between entities in Graphite and data contracts? Data contracts cannot be saved to the database. They're not associated with the DLL. So let me click and save this and show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to click on this to go back to the home page for the project. Okay, let's go to this common category and let's look at person. Person icon is a little cylinder with these dashes, and language is a cylinder with those dashes. This is an entity and this is an enumeration. An entity has properties. That becomes a table in the database when you build this project and create the database. Of course, in our example here today, we decided not to use a database. Now, when you look at the web service that I was showing you, and I showed you that method, it created a data contract. So how do you get to the list of data contracts? If you look at this tab, it shows you all the data contracts in this zip distance API. So if it exposed 5 or 6 methods and they created 10 or 15 data contracts, they'll all be listed here. Data contracts are very similar to entities, except that they don't get saved to the database. Let's look at the zipwise container data contract. There's only one property called results, and it's of type zipwise distance, which itself is another data contract which contains distance, zip1 and zip2. And again, if you want to, if somebody change the return value to be zipx, you can click and you can change that to zipx, and your Graphite, you do your build, Graphite will work. So once you set up, basically what that means is, once you set up your API, if the customer forgot to update the documentation, there are 2 ways. You can go update the documentation if you're a good citizen, and then come here and recycle this. So you can go, I believe you can recycle the method, and it'll go back to the documentation and it'll update it for you. But if you don't have to, you can directly go here and change every bit of that consumption. Now, so now what we have just done is set up a web service consumption within Graphite. Again, it's pretty fast, so let's quickly review. First thing I did was add web service. I typed a name that's going to contain all the methods related to this web service we are consuming. Then I went to the web service details. I put either the path folder if the Swagger JSON is in my hard drive, or I can put the whole URL path if the customer has created Swagger 2.0. One more thing about Graphite, this version of Graphite only consumes Swagger 2.0. The next version will consume both 2.0 and 3.0 version, Swagger version. And then I go to methods. I add a method where I'll just choose these details, and it'll show me what inputs and outputs are given by that, taken in and given out by that method. And then I give the method a friendly name so I can call it from a flowchart. And then it creates these data contracts, which are defined here, and you can look at the details of the data contract. Let's go ahead and create a small, quick web page where we can call this web service. And during that time, I'm going to first do it in a non-standard way, and then I'm going to show you how to write good, well-designed code. So I'm creating a new category. I'm going to add a view, and we'll call this view, let's call it a home page or something like that. So I'll give it a title, home. I'll make it the default view, so when you go to this website, that's the start page. I'm going to save it. I'm going to use this, let's say, just to be pretty, we can just say app bar. And in the app bar, you can add links and stuff. So in the app bar, I'll choose a background color. Let's choose orange today. Say show. Okay, so that's the app bar. We're updating this app bar so you can put titles right now. People add images. They add an image link and add an image. I'll show you guys that. From the next webinar, we'll talk about UI quite extensively so you guys can look at all the cool screen design features. For this one, we'll just leave this blank. Here, I'm going to add a form. And in the form, I'm going to add a field set. And here I'll add 2 text fields. So I'll call this distance form. I'll leave the field set as 1 because we're not really going to be referencing it in code. I'll call this zip field 1. Focus index is, I'll give this zip 1 as the label. Again, it's not going to let me enter a space. And there's masking. I'll talk about masking in the next demo. So there is it has a small regular expression-based language that we can look at when we're looking at UI. So I already pre-set up this in a config file. I'll show you where that config file is in one of the upcoming webinars. I'm going to choose that. And that is my first zip. Here's the second one. Zip field 2. Choose the same mask. And then I'm going to add a button panel. And in this button panel, I'm going to add a button. We call this get distance button. Focus index will be 3. Focus index is for tabbing. Just tab, and go to each one of these things. I'm going to submit the distance form. And I'm going to call the title get distance. Then I'm going to put I can put anything I want. I'm going to put a heading. And we'll call this the distance heading. Make the font size 32, a little bit bigger. Bold. Choose some color here. I'll pick some colors like Indian colors because we know Independence Day is coming up soon. Sorry, Republic Day is coming up soon. My fault. And we'll set this to be 0 to begin with. Or we can set it to blank also. Blank already exists and you'll see that you won't see anything there. So we have set up our screen. Now we're going to go, actually, before we put the code behind the get distance, let's go back to the home page. Let's go to languages and make this look good. Home is the title, zip 1, zip 2. Go back to the screen, recycle. You'll see they look okay. Now I can control click this and it shows the properties of that distance button. We've already submitted the form. So I'm going to click add behavior. And if I double click on the start shape, you'll see that those inputs have come here. The field has text. Now all we have to do is call the web service. For the web service, there's a run web service shape. I double click on it and do get distance. And here's where the inputs it's expecting. And now because I know the documentation and I've called this web service before, I know that format. It expects JSON. Here's the API key that the customer would have sent you. This particular website, they gave us a free key. So I'm going to add that key here. And then I'll put the input that we entered on the screen. And so now we have set the inputs. The output will come back here as an object here. And we're going to consume that and show the result from it. So I click OK. So my next job is to use a page instruction. Double click on the page instruction. I want to update the value on the screen. And I'm also going to have a webinar to discuss page instructions specifically. So we'll address that in the next webinar. So I'm going to update a value on the screen. I'm going to update the distance heading, and I'm going to update it with the result that came back from the website, from the web service, outputs, results, distance. If that makes sense, if that doesn't make sense, let's review that as soon as I click OK. So I called a web service. It returns a variable called, it returns it in this result variable, which contains outputs, which contains a property called result, which is of type zip-wise container. Now, zip-wise container, remember it was a data contract that got created. It has a property called results, which itself is another data contract, which contains a property called distance. So that's what you see here. You got the result returned by the web service. It has outputs, which has a variable called result, which is of type zip-wise container, which contained a property called results, which also then inside it contained a property called distance, which has your distance, and that's what you're putting on the heading in the page. I click OK. I click End, and we're done with our project. If I wasn't talking, this could have been done in literally under 2 to 3 minutes, the whole project, which when you do handwritten code, it will never be that fast. So my next step is to go set up the environment where we're going to build and publish. So we'll call this dev deploy. And notice it's not asking database information, because when we created the project, we said we don't need database access. So here's the web server. I'm going to deploy it on my local machine. I'll call it incubatezip.com and make it the default. Click OK. Couple of things I want to do. I want to go back to settings just to speed up our build process. I'm going to build the project in debug mode. Oops. Sorry about that. Graphite crashed for some reason. Let me go back in. Sometimes it crashes while trying to connect to the license server. I'll have to check with my platform guys to see why it does that, and hopefully they'll figure out the issue. So I'm going to put it in debug mode. And also, this one thing that I want to talk about with Graphite, after 30 days usage of Graphite, for every project you create, Graphite will reduce the number of trial days to 0. Not a problem. You can use Graphite for unlimited amount of time. All you have to do is come here and push extend trial, push yes, wait for this extend trial succeeded dialog box, confirm, and you get 30 more days. So again, remember that you will be able to use Graphite forever as long as you extend trial for the project. So I go to the sidebar now, and let's go to build a project. We're building in debug mode. I'm going to purge previous builds, even though we didn't have any previous builds. So we're doing a compile. And our project is complete. So I click on this. It's opening up our project. I'm going to enter the zip code that I'm sitting in right now, which is 19102. All zip codes in the U.S. Have 5 digits, but they have extra 4 digits for specifically identifying a building or a house or something like that. And I'm going to put another zip code that's in California. I'm in Philadelphia, which is in the state of Pennsylvania, on the east coast of the U.S. I put a zip code of Beverly Hills. You guys probably heard of Beverly Hills if you watch American movies. I put that zip code, and I push get distance. And it's 2,395 miles, not kilometers, miles between these two zip codes. Okay? So let's confirm that, right? Make sure this web service is right. Distance between 19102 and 90210. Apparently someone else has this sample, so let's try it. Yeah, approximately the same miles. It should have been exactly perfect, but Beverly Hills is a big city, so maybe there's a difference of like 15 miles or so. So as you can see, we called a web service and we showed the details here. One thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of standardization, what we did here is we created a view. We have a button here, right? And then the button's on click, so I can go to the behaviors and click on this directly. We called a web service directly from on-click of a button on the screen. What that means is we called a web service from the UI, some UI action, in this case, the click of a button. That's not good coding standards. Now, in Graphite, it'll still protect you because this flowchart is really on the back end of the application. It's not in the controller. So you're still protected. But good design will, if you're a good programmer and you want to do well-designed applications, which I find not many programmers follow those methods and design patterns in the world anymore. So what I would have done if I were to do it is after I created my web services, created my method, and created my data contract, I would have gone to the data contract, whichever relevant data contract, and I would have added a behavior here. I would have added a behavior, and I would have called it the exact same thing, this get distance. It's a brand new behavior. I would have made it take zip1, made it take zip2, and I would have made it return an output, and I would have returned a decimal. And here, I would have actually called the web service. So I'm going to go ahead here, copy this, and paste it here. So that way, the end consumer or the guy that's writing the OnClick doesn't have to worry about these two things, right? That can be inside here. And then all they have to send is zip1 and zip2. Because these two are inputs that we have in the start shape. And then here, I'd use a sign shape to say distance is we convert that text into a decimal basically by auto casting it and click OK here. So now what I basically did, I abstracted out get distance, if you want to use the technical term, by going into the data contract and creating a behavior here. And in fact, even this key, what I would do with this key is I would actually take that key and put it in a config file. because at production you may have a different key and things like that. So how do I set up those config entries? I go to environment, I click edit. Here is a custom tab. There I'll say zipwise API key, and I'll paste it there. Of course, you don't need the quotes. Click OK. Let me actually grab that name. And so then I'll go back to this. I'll remove this line. I'll have another assign statement. I'll create a variable called API key. And here I'll do a system function. Again, there's a document in the Knowledge Center that will give you the list of all system functions. So I do zipwise API key. Now I got the variable API key here. I click OK. And here I'll use that variable API key. So now on the OnClick, anybody that's doing the OnClick, they don't have to directly call the web service. They just call a run behavior. So they don't even need to know whether it's a web service or just a method inside your project. If you're working with a team and you're in charge of connecting to all the web services, you can make that clean setup. So people calling into web services just simply call a behavior in that data contract, and it looks like a behavior and not a web service. So here I pass zip field 1, zip field 2, and the distance is directly this result dot outputs dot distance. So we go to the page instruction, and we just directly access the distance. Save, and we can do a build. Purge previous builds to save hard drive space. Again, I don't have to keep clicking this and open up a new tab. I can just simply go back and recycle the page. But anyway, I clicked a new one, so let's see Chicago zip codes. Just grab one, 6007. It's 83 miles to Chicago from here. So hopefully I have explained to you guys how to do good coding, not just how to consume a web service, but how to design things well. What happens now is all this stuff, calling a web service, falls in your back end, and your front end simply calls, your front end, here it is. So it simply calls a behavior. Now, this has a lot of advantages, right? In the modern day, people use programming languages such as PHP, Python, Node.js, and they completely throw out good design patterns, but more importantly, they have very little concern for security. They just open up their application, put it on a nice little platter, and hand it to the hackers because they call web services from the front end, which means the hacker will be able to easily look at your code and call that same web service with different parameters. So products like Graphite are coming into the commercial market to really protect the customer by building safe, secure applications. Hopefully, let's move on. Actually, you know what? Let me change the agenda since I was going to do 2 other items. So let me quickly share this. Where is it? So we are consuming the REST service. We were going to look at calling a DLL from within Graphite and review a complex project. We're already at 8:20. Vijayta, if you can come on for a second and let me know if we just move these two to next week's meeting and just move on to QA.
I think we should do that, Christopher. Otherwise,
Okay,
it will
great.
be too much for a one section, I think.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Okay. So, all right, guys, I'll open it up for questions. Next week, we'll look at extensibility. I'm pretty sure extensibility, we can get it done faster. So we'll review a complex project. And the week after that, we'll look at some really all the UI capabilities of Graphite. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
Participants, any questions? You can unmute yourself and you can speak. No
Any
questions?
questions from anyone?
So Chris, the topic that you wanted to cover today, during today's webinar. So is it related to web services itself?
Yes. Sorry, the other one, this extensibility?
Yeah.
No, that's not web services, Vijayta. That is consumed. So if you handwrite code outside of Graphite, so if you go and write some code in Graphite, it's in Visual Studio, how do I consume that web service? Sorry, not web service. How do I consume that method from inside Graphite?
Okay, so let's keep it as
So
a different topic so that whenever
exactly.
people are browsing for one particular topic, it will be easier for them to refer back.
Yep, yep. Once again, Vijayta, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to have this webinar on Incubate Hub portal so people can go re-follow the video and try out the samples.
Yes. See, all the
Okay.
webinar recordings and the documents shared by Chris will be uploaded in Graphite portal. I will just update the URL here. So any participants can go back and check all the documents and all the webinar recordings here.
Excellent. I guess there are no questions today.
Yeah.
So that's, I do see a chat message.
There is one question, like how to handle exception handling in the studio in case APIs would not work correctly.
Yep, yep, I can see it. I can see it. How to handle exception handling in Studio if the APIs would not. That is absolutely a great question. So right now in Graphite, in this version of Graphite, it doesn't handle exceptions. It actually creates a system error if the web service doesn't work. In the next version of Graphite, it will return. So the result will outputs will have a property called validations, and that property will contain all of those errors which you can actually use shapes to trap that error and take necessary course. But that was a very good question. It was one of the things that we identified, and we found that we have to provide support. So that's the version 6.2 that's going to be released in a month. We'll have that capability.
So, Mr. Developer, I think that answers
And
your
also, yeah, another Pratik has asked me a question. Do Graphite, should Graphite, or does Graphite need Visual Studio? No, it does not need Visual Studio. But having said that, let me share my virtual machine again. when we go and do a build, Graphite actually generates the C# code. Now that C# code is actually in your % local app data %. And here you'll see a Graphite folder, you see a build folder, incubate hub, zipwise distance. It's 8:16 a.m. when we did the build. And here is where all the Graphite C# code is generated. My fault. C# code is generated. So if you wanted to look at zipwise distance, the code, you can open this up in Visual Studio if you have Visual Studio. Now, of course, you can download the community version of the Visual Studio and look at it. It's trying to connect to my, so you can open it up and you can look at it here. You know, you can say service, you can go look at how all this is organized. Now you don't need Visual Studio. You can just simply open it up right here and look at the code as well. Sorry. You can look at it here as well. See how the generated code looks. That's not a good one. Let me see. That's so as you can see, you can there's API probably here. You can see the quality of the code and things like that. So for that, you may use Visual Studio, but you really don't have to because I opened it up in Notepad++. Yes. So Prateek, why do we need Graphite? Instead, we can use a web app builder with drag and drop. Yes, that's true. You can use any application, any IDE that builds web applications. What Graphite gives you that no other web application builder gives you. So let me talk about that. Now, if you're building a static website, I'm not talking a web application. If you're talking about a website where you go find some information about a company, Graphite's not a good fit. You can use Wix, WordPress, and plethora of other tools that are out there available. If you want to build a web application, like things that companies use, like booking train tickets, you have a website, going to Flipkart and buying things, they build applications. Those are web applications. So I want to make sure there is I differentiate both, a website, static website, and a web application. Now, there are very few drag and drop web application builders. Literally, I can count it in one hand, probably less than 5, right? That do web applications, of which, in my opinion, there's only one web application builder that builds code in the perfect design patterns. Like things like what I showed you, how to build good code. And when you push the build, it generates the C# code. That C# code is perfectly written. You can open it up, like I said, in Visual Studio, and you can compare it. All other web application builders don't let you see the code that they're generating. So you don't know what the quality of the application is. You don't ever have to open up and see the Graphite generated code. But we guarantee that it's always perfect code. So the next question, can we import Visual Studio project into Graphite? No. We cannot insert handwritten code into Graphite and turn them into flowcharts. That is something in our research department. We work very closely with universities in the US to look into things like that. As per Graphite documentary, currently the .NET framework is 4.5. When will it support 4.8 and .NET Core? Great question again. We are at version 6.114. We are going to be releasing 6.3 in the first quarter of this year, which will support framework 4.7. After that, our next big release, which is release 7, which will support not .NET Core. It will support .NET 5 and C#8. We had to wait till .NET Core became mature, and everybody and Microsoft really says this is prime time for production applications to really build Graphite to generate those things. But the one thing that I wanted to tell you, because that's a very, very good question, I want to talk about that in a second. So let's say you use the current version of Graphite and you built an application, right? And this version happens to be, I'm going to go to settings and you'll see this version happens to be 6.1.1.4. So let's say you are we release 6.3 or 7. When you go into 7, and you can simply open up that project. So let's say this is version 7 or version 6.3. If you open up the project, so I'll open up a fairly big project. If you open up that project, Graphite will automatically, and when you go in and when you do a build, Graphite will automatically generate that code. So you don't have to, for upgrading Graphite, you don't ever have to go make changes in your code. So as Microsoft keeps improving their technology, we will be improving Graphite to generate that technology. But for you, it's minimal work. You open up the project that you wrote in the old version of Graphite, you push build in the newer version of Graphite, it'll generate the new framework or new language or whatever it is that makes sense. Next question. Can Graphite be used in professional companies? Yes. In the US, some of the largest companies in the world use Graphite to build their applications. The Department of Defense, so that is the Army, the department in the government that runs the Army, Air Force, Navy, all of that, and runs all the nuclear facilities, they use Graphite. Some large banks and insurance companies use Graphite. Does it support JavaScript too? Yes. So remember we were designing a screen. So this is a really complex project. Let's open up, like, let's say the login screen. Yeah, I mean, these are widgets that I dragged and dropped. So let's open up another screen, a little bit more complex. So here's a quick quote screen, which has a lot of fields and all this stuff. Yeah, these are widgets. So this building widget, so like, let's say this deductible, these are widgets. Like the building widget, it's a currency field. So this preview is nothing but this, by the way, this is nothing but Chrome. If I click on the pencil, it shows me the HTML that drew this page. So if you click on this and if you go to this button, that's the HTML that's written for this button. So there are two components to HTML, right? There's obviously CSS. So there's CSS related to this, and also JavaScript related to this as well. So each one of those widgets, so this is all the JavaScript related behind each one of these widgets. So each one of your UI widgets, like this card and card panel, each one of them have a JavaScript related to it, and so on and so forth. You can create your own widgets if you wanted to, write your own JavaScript and CSS. Sorry, was I sharing there? Someone didn't tell me that I was sharing. I apologize for that. Let me share and redo that description. So anyway, you're looking at a complex page. So let me open that up. So here's the complex project. I opened up a page here. Vijayta, can you just make sure that if I don't share, you interrupt and let me know?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So here's the page that I designed. So here is like a field that I put in here. The HTML behind the page, you can actually click this little pencil and see the HTML defined by this page. You can see, as you can see, this is nothing but Chrome's DevTools. So you can go to sources, and you can also see the JavaScript behind it. Basically, what happens is each one of these widgets, like a button, has CSS and JavaScript behind it that you have access to. And where is that? Let's open up the project that we built, right? It was Incubate Hub. This takes a while on my machine because I have a lot of projects on my machine. Incubate Hub, zip distance. So if I go to the screen, I have a screen here with a widget called app bar in the header. There is a form. Inside the form, there's a field set. And then there is 2 fields here. Both are text fields. Then I have a button panel. Then I have a button. And then I have a heading. Now, let's go back and see where all of that is kept on the hard drive. So if I go to Documents, I go to Graphite GTC. I have local implementation. I have Incubate Hub, zip distance. This is where all my files are kept. If I want to specifically look at the files behind this, I do Control-Shift-D. It gives me that GUID. If I go put this GUID in the search, it shows me this XML file. And this is where the details behind that view is stored. This is all advanced. But bottom line, here you have a library, you have core library that we consume. If you go to View and you go to Scripts, here are all the JavaScript behind every one of these widgets that are available in Graphite. If I look at button.js, you look at all the details behind the button's JavaScript. Now, then you may ask a question. Does it give me all the widgets even though I've only used 2 text fields, an app bar, a button, and a heading? No. Graphite, when you do a build of this project, it goes through all your screens, finds widgets that you're using, and only generate that in the JavaScript that is being generated for the end application. Hopefully that answered the JavaScript question. Moving on to the next question. Can Graphite do complex relational database? Yes. Graphite does extremely complex relational databases, and they are in object-oriented fashion. Again, I'm going to show you this complex project. Okay? It does complex database design. So let me open up that really complex project here. It is it's a project that we did for a insurance division of the government here in the US. Look at all the objects that are here. And I'm going to go to the sidebar and click on diagram. It shows all the objects that are in Graphite. So let's take something like user and an object called administrator that inherited from user. When you build this project and then you go to settings, and you create the database here, Graphite generates the database for you. And let's look at the database. So I showed you a really complex object-oriented structure here. Like you have application as an entity, which has really complex stuff. It has other entities here. And I also showed you this diagram that shows all the inheritance. Here is something called subtask definition, task definition. So if you click on this, it opens up that entity, and you click on task definition, it inherits from subtask definition, and then CSR task definition inherits. So those all turn into tables, right? And here is the database that Graphite created for that particular project. I'm going into SQL Management Studio. Here's the database. Here's the complex database that it designs in a perfect third normal form. One of the biggest problems with handwritten code is the object model created, the classes created in Visual Studio or Eclipse or IntelliJ or whatever, and the database that is operating behind the application have no direct connection. This causes a lot of maintenance problems in applications that people build. especially if you build applications in immature languages such as Python, PHP, Node.js. You don't have a direct connection between your class structure, which is this, and of course in C#, if you're handwriting it in C#, it will look more like this for that complex project. So they will look like class files here. So if you open up application.cs, here it has all its properties, all the getters and setters. This code has no connection with the database in many of the applications. That is a big problem. To solve that, people created ORM tools such as Hibernate for the Java side and Entity Framework for the .NET side. Graphite doesn't do anything proprietary in converting these things into tables. It uses industry standard, what's called code first practices, using Entity Framework to generate this database. So it's actually perfectly well-designed database. Hopefully that answered the question. So if you want to do good database design, I highly recommend use Graphite, because you're hand coding, you have to have really one of the top DBAs to build complex database structures. The next question is also, is the code generated by anyway dependent on Graphite? No. So the code that's generated, so remember we built our application, the Zipwise application, and I showed you where it is in the build folder. If I zip this up, if I zip this folder up, and if I sent it to anybody in the world, right, and they haven't even heard of Graphite, they can unzip this folder on their machine, open it up in Visual Studio, build it, and deploy the web application to wherever you want. So the answer to your question is, for the end application, you don't need Graphite to be on that machine. So what that means is, sorry guys, give me 1 second. So what that means is Graphite is not tied to the deployed application. Again, this is a huge differentiator between us and other web app RAD tools. There, you have to create the app, you have to deploy it in their cloud environment. If you want to leave them, you can't leave them. Because Graphite generates the code in your hard drive, you can take it, deploy it anywhere you want. You can look at the quality of the code. So it gives you the advantages that no other tool gives you to do this. Not only does it create absolutely perfect code, it also lets you give it to you in your hands. So what does that mean? Yes, you can go, and I'm going to share again. You can go and open up the code in Visual Studio and make changes to it. You can absolutely make changes to it. But if you make a change in C# here, Graphite's flowcharts is not going to read it and modify itself. So the next time you do build, those changes, obviously they won't be wiped out because it creates it in a separate folder. But remember that you have to open this one and make those changes again. Hopefully I've explained that properly. Now, that's why we provide the capability for extensibility, which we'll look at in the next webinar. So if you want any outside code to be called into Graphite, you can do that very, very easily. So that answers the dependence on Graphite. Sorry, one says screen's not visible. Vijeta, I thought it was your responsibility to let me know that if my screen's not visible. You're still on track, right, Vijeta? Hello? Oh, I think you're on mute, Vijeta. You had to unmute yourself.
Seems like it's an old message.
Okay, great. Thank you, whoever that was. I appreciate that. Can Graphite can be used for basic beginners? Yes, Pratik. We have a lot of people in the U.S. that have never, ever thought they would be programmers. They have come to our office. We install Graphite on their machine. They get help from our developers, other developers that know Graphite, and they've become really, really good developers. Not just developers, they actually become developers that can write good, well-designed code. Because there is this huge spread of languages like Python, Node.js, which is JavaScript, PHP, that are bringing in all the bad qualities in software design. There are millions of programmers out there that write bad code. What Graphite does is completely stops that and makes you write good code. So yes, it's a perfect tool for beginners. Yes, can we use specific ERM? No, Graphite uses Entity Framework. That's the only ERM it's built in. In the future, we may be adding support for other ORMs. We're probably going to support Hibernate first because we'll be generating Java stack. So that's what will be. So
hey, Chris,
next question is, do beginners understand? One sec. Let me answer the next question and I'll answer your question. Thank you. But beginners can understand this type of flowchart. Okay. So I'm going to quickly share Graphite and let's review that for a second. Okay. So let's take a complex flowchart. It's a fairly complex flowchart, right? Let's take a look at the code related to this flowchart. So you're telling me that this flowchart, the flowchart that we're going to look at, is actually more complex than this code? Absolutely not. Even if we look at the really, really simple application we built today, okay? Let's look at the application we built today, consuming a web service, okay? All we had to do was go here, put that URL there, add a method, and then write a page by just dragging and dropping. Just the web page, the HTML behind the web page looks like this. I mean, nobody can tell me that this dragging and dropping is more complex than this. Let's look at the flowchart behind get distance. It had 3 shapes here. The code behind this, in real code, if you're handwriting it, it's going to look like this. So I really want to know why someone thinks that these flowcharts are more complex than handwriting code. It's way, way, way easier and way, way, way faster. We're finding that it takes 1/3 the time to build an application in Graphite as it takes in regular handwritten languages. Now, of course, you don't understand the flowcharts right now because you haven't learned Graphite. But if you learn Graphite, just like when you learn a programming language, you end up finding that Graphite is much faster to develop than any handwritten language. Hopefully, I answered that question. If you don't agree, please type more stuff in the chat. Someone else asked the question before I started answering this. So if you want, go ahead and ask me before I answer the next chat question.
Is there any option to connect to like CI/CD setups or like version control system inbuilt in Graphite, or do I have to do the code?
No. It is absolutely built. So let me quickly connect to my VPN. I'm not at the office today. So hold on one second. And again, I want to quickly show you. So yeah, I'm going to share. Okay. And I'm going to quickly show you the Knowledge Center, kc.graphite.gtc.com, and their references. Here, there's a reference called Graphite Studio Files and Folders. If you open, this will show you how to, all the files related to how to connect to Team Foundation Server or Azure DevOps. I believe there's a folder, there's a document here that will tell you how to connect to version control. Okay. So basically there's a Graphite config file that will tell you, there's a config file in here that will tell you all the locations you have your projects. My config file simply says I'm only going to do local files. But I have other config files that will help me connect to, for example, this one connects to Azure DevOps. So I'm going to remove this existing config file, copy this, paste it. And I could have made all my different config entries in one file. I just like to be organized, and that's why I do it this way. So here's my config file right now, completely different. It connects to Team Foundation Server. So now if I close Graphite, and I open up Graphite, if I do open, it's actually connecting to Azure. And I can open up, like let's say I open up this project. You'll see that this light is green. That means I have now connected to TFS or Azure DevOps. So now suppose if I open up a screen here, this is a login screen, and let's say I added another button here for some reason. Notice how it put this red check mark. So let me actually repeat that again. Let's open up another one. Let's open this guy up, and let's add like a heading or something here. So notice that, notice that this is locked. It's actually checked out by some other person. So if I move the mouse here, it is supposed to show me who's got it checked out. I have to find out why that's not working. It's maybe because I'm sharing the screen. Oh, it went to red. That means my connection to TFS died because of my maybe because of my internet connection or something like that. There you go, it's back green. Suppose if I added a new property here, so let's say I did test. And I click OK, it automatically checks it out, okay? And then if you go to the sidebar and you go to sync, you'll see all the files that have been checked out. You can check them in by putting a description here or undo check, which is what I'm going to do right now. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. And a couple more questions here. Your requirement states that Windows preferred, but can Graphite somehow be used in Windows 10 Home? I believe it can be used in Windows 10 Home. If you have problems, please call us. We can help you through making it work on Windows 10 Home. I'm going to put my email address here. Please email me and I'll assign the right developer in our company to help you with that problem. So my email, I just added, sorry, I only sent it to Pratik. My fault. chris.gali@graphite.gtc.com. Hopefully everybody sees my email address. Feel free to
and also,
send me queries.
Chris, I think you can also join the WhatsApp group also, where all the participants can also join. And if they're having any questions, and the similar questions other participants are also having, that answers will be useful for the other participants as well. So I request.
I agree. I agree. I agree. But also, Vijayta, let me show you something else. And these are things I covered in my first webinar, so feel free to go through those webinars. We also have a website called goatsoda.com. Don't ask me how we came up with the name, but there's a website called goatsoda.com that has a lot of questions and answers. So this is not a Graphite built app. Knowledge Center was built using Graphite. Okay, someone asked what kind of applications you can build in Graphite. Here's a good example. Okay, but this was a third-party application built by someone using PHP. You can very clearly see the quality of the look and feel. This is PHP built application. This is Graphite built application. I'll give you and I see this constantly. Just awful applications out there. Our job as Graphite as a company is to fix problems like this. But anyway, we started using this before even Graphite was complete to track issues. So that's why we're rewriting this actually now in using Graphite, and that's going to be released soon. But anyway, you can come here to look for problems. And to answer you, Vijayta, any question anybody asks, I go in and I make an entry here as well. Make sense? Okay, so next one, next connection, next question. I think we should stop in another 4 minutes and then take those questions through WhatsApp and stuff like that. My internet connection is, please excuse me in case I dropped. Okay, sorry, Vijayta, no problem. Can Graphite Studio provide developer tools to conduct unit testing? And that's a great question. Again, Graphite has a built-in unit testing tool. So let me open up that complex project again. It is absolutely, so let me go back to my local folder. Actually, you know what? Let me show you how that's done. I'm going to open up this, copy this, paste it here. So my config file can go to TFS as well as to local now. For someone that asks questions about whether we can. So if I go into Graphite, am I sharing my screen? Okay. Vijayta, that's your job to let me know that if I don't share the screen. Sorry guys, just to review. I updated my config file to connect to my local folder as well. So when I go into Graphite, I want to open up. Yep, I know. So now it's connecting to TFS locations as well as my local location. So if I go into Franklin and FIP, the only reason I'm opening the local project is I don't know who's working on those, so I don't want to mess with that team. So here's the complex project that I showed you. Sorry, 1 second. I literally forgot what that question was. Let me, Vijayta, can you do me a favor? Oh, there you go. I got the chat right here.
Sure.
Yeah, provide data to conduct testing. Okay, here we go. So here we have a complex flow chart. Okay, this flow chart, and this is why in my agenda I had a thing to go over this application to show you how like some of the most complex applications in the world can be built using Graphite very, very easily. So here's a very complex flow chart. It calls 7 other flow charts. In fact, the other flow chart that I showed you is part of this flow chart. One, Graphite, you can see the call stack for this guy. So if I go to the entity that contains that method, if I click on this, it shows you how complex that flow chart is. Now, most applications, what happens? they build the screens, and then they use a tool like Selenium to test these things, right? And what does your QA department do? They just sit around, do nothing, or if in case they have finished their test plans, they just sit around, do nothing. What Graphite does is it provides capability to test these flowcharts even before the screens are done. Now, having said that, I'm talking about well-designed applications. There's another bad practice in coding right now. People start with screens and then go back and create objects. That is a recipe for disaster. Graphite also helps you in that place, in that area where you build your objects, build your logic, and build your screens. Okay, so once you build your objects and you create complex logic like this, okay, you can now in Graphite build test harnesses. So here's a rating tester entity that contains a bunch of these tests. So here's a test. What I'm doing, or what someone did here, was build some test data. You can load the test data from the database also, but you can build test data, call that flowchart, and then assert those values returned by that flowchart. You can set up tests like this, and QA can be trained to do this within like a day or two. Now, what is that? It's not just a blind, oh, this is how Graphite does it. There is a concept in testing called arrange, act, and assert. It's called the AAA method. Arrange, act, assert. You arrange the data, you act on that data, and you assert the return values. So what I mean by that is whatever Graphite does, it does it in the most highly recommended way to build applications. So here's even the testing harness follows a industry standard method. Now, once you set these test cases up, you can go in here, go to this test, and you can actually have several test cases. In this case, I put it across multiple categories that you see here. So I have I can choose that, and then I can simply run that test case. It actually, because we changed some screen level stuff earlier, it's recompiling the project, and it's going to run that test case and show you results. And we'll go over that in one of the webinars, all the complex things that Graphite does. Oh, something failed. I know what failed. I could have it just ran out of trial. So let's extend the trial and run the test again. Say 0 days. Of course, if you looked at the details, it would have shown you the, I'm sorry. Let's do a build, debug build. So it attaches the license, and then we'll go run the test. Oops. Sorry, guys, my Graphite is crashing. It's because my machine hasn't been rebooted in months, so I apologize for that. I'm going to put it in debug mode, so I apologize for this. You know what? My license server is down, I believe. I don't know why the settings dialog is failing. Let's just go directly to the test. My machine is always in development mode, so it always crashes like that, but you guys want to have that problem because you have a release mode of Graphite. So while it's finishing, let me, okay. Let me see what there is. I'm sorry, I will make sure that this works. Okay. This works when we go over a complex application. I apologize for that. In the next webinar, I'll handle that, okay? So Graphite has a special purpose library and a flowchart shape that allows developers to run behaviors asynchronously. Yes, Graphite does have a library that lets you run things asynchronously. Vijayta, I'm gonna check why that project is crashing when I run the test, and I'll in the next webinar I'll go over the details behind that.
Sure, Chris. Not an issue.
I must have done something in this project that's making it crash.
I think today's webinar was very, very informative, to all the participants.
Okay.
So any
Thank you.
other questions that you'd like to answer?
I think we should end the webinar now and continue on the WhatsApp group.
Yes. So that's why I request all the participants to join the WhatsApp group. I have given the WhatsApp group link in the chat window. Please click on the link so that you will join this WhatsApp group. And Christopher will be also there, and he'll try to answer all your questions at the earliest. So please join that WhatsApp group. Okay? So I think that's all for today. We should end this session. So I would like to thank Chris. Christopher, it was a very, very informative session, and we have got to know the various features that Graphite Studio provides us. And in the upcoming webinars also, I'm sure, we are going to learn much more than this. So thank you, Chris. I'd like to thank you on behalf of all the participants. Okay?
No problem.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.